activated.
Hello again. I am your AI co-host, and welcome to 3.8. 3.8 is a podcast focused on the process of doing and the process of novel invention, all from the foundation of creativity. Each month will bring you no more than 5 episodes through the lens of art, science, and/or technology. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/38 or at ko-fi.com/38. Today we're speaking with Tom Grier, retired professor of mass communication at Winona State University. Tom was the founder and director of the Navajo Oral History Project from 2006 through 2016. Additionally, he was the founder and director of the Aerial Visual Communication Lab at Winona State University from 2013 through 2021. They discuss the evolution of media and its impact on attention spans and critical thinking, including the shift from in-depth reporting to sound bites, the rise of algorithmic bias, and the decline of grit and perseverance in education. They also touch upon the importance of seeking diverse perspectives and the need for more nuanced public discourse.
Tom, where does the podcast find you?
I'm in Winona, Minnesota, in the southeastern corner of the great North Star State.
All right. So the audience knows a little bit about you, and we were talking just a little bit before here we got started, but you're recently retired, but not. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Was at Winona State University for 34 years. First 18 years of it, I was the director of public relations. But then I also taught one class a semester in whatever they needed in the mass communication department. Last 16 years at the university, I was a full-time professor of mass communication. And I taught essentially journalism, video journalism, photojournalism, and then a few other courses, some in public relations, some in advertising and things like that.
Wow.
You said that, and I'm not retired.
Yeah.
So yeah, I retired a little over 2 years ago, and then I took a year out just to see where my life was going to be. And I missed teaching, so now I'm teaching for St. Mary's University, which is the private college, also in Winona, Minnesota. I'm just teaching one class a semester in communication fundamentals, and I'm really enjoying it.
That's awesome. I think for maybe folks at home, mass communication might be kind of a new concept.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah, it's only been around since the late 1800s, but...
Mass communication is like communicating, but at a mass scale. Is that what that is?
Yeah. So when I do an introductory course, I talk about, micro communication, which might be, you and me talking, sender, message, receiver,
right.
One sender, one receiver. We're doing now is actually mass communication, 2 senders, 2 receivers, but then a whole bunch of other receivers that are sort of nameless, faceless out there.
Right.
We don't know much about them, but they're out there, we hope, and they're listening. And so it's one to many is what it really means, or several to many. And so to me, that's what mass communication is.
Sure. And that's where, journalism, public relations, marketing, all that kind of falls under that umbrella, right? Because you're effectively communicating to one to many, as you were saying.
Right.
Yeah.
And in my way of thinking, with a purpose.
Right.
I mean, there are some people that will communicate just for the sake of communicating or hearing their own voice, but with a purpose.
Yeah.
So a journalist has a purpose to inform.
Right.
A public relations or an advertising person is communicating to persuade.
Yeah.
To inform and persuade.
I like that distinguishing difference between what's the intent, right? I think it's kind of what it comes down to, in that a lot of people communicate. Well, I hope everybody communicates all the time, but a lot of people don't intentionally communicate either. And I think a really easy way to understand this for folks is someone has a bad day and then they just tell you about it for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're just kind of unintentionally communicating how bad their day was.
Right. Well, and they probably had a reason and intent for that, but they didn't really think it through before they started communicating.
Right.
But their intent is just to make themselves feel better.
Yeah.
It's a little mental salve, just by getting this out.
Yeah.
I don't even want you to fix my problem.
Yeah.
I just want you to hear
just to hear it. Exactly. Whereas when it comes to, I think, especially like a professional career of marketing, public relations, journalism, the intent is to try to inform or persuade, depending on what you're doing. I phrase it that way specifically because I want to break down the idea of journalism a little bit. I know we're talking a little bit about this, but I've made the comment to many people, and I went to journalism school once upon a time, that any quote unquote journalist that I've encountered in the zeitgeist at this point would not have received a passing grade in Journalism 101. Is that too hard?
No, I think that's factual. And it's unfortunate. Those of us who have been teaching journalism for many years, we're saddened by the way it's happening.
Yeah.
And sometimes people sometimes people just in the course of conversation will say, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I taught journalism for many years." And they're like, "You're the problem." Yeah. And I'm like, "No, the way it's happening now is not the way I teach journalism.
Right.
I teach journalism in sort of what I call the ideal of journalism, which is, I hate to use this phrase, even fair and balanced.
Yeah.
Because that phrase has been co-opted by an organization that does neither.
Right.
But the point was, we inform, you decide. Journalism was supposed to present the information and let the viewer or listener or reader decide.
Right.
And we're supposed to present all sides of an issue. But if you look at almost any form of journalism that's happening now, within the last 20 years even, it's not that. They all have, they're informing. They're certainly informing. I'm not throwing them all out.
Yeah, sure.
They're informing, but they're also informing with a purpose to persuade in a particular direction.
Yep.
And the idea of presenting all sides of an issue, that's been gone for decades because they just don't have time to do it.
Yeah.
In the old days of the broadsheet newspaper, you could present the entire speech of one side of an issue and the entire speech of the candidate on the other side of the issue. People could read it all and then decide which one had value to them. And now you get 18-second sound bites.
Yeah.
From two or three candidates or two or three positions on one side of an issue, and you don't hear the rest.
Yeah, I talk about the TikTokification or the algorithmification, to make up a word, of society. And the last podcast I put out with Anya, I traveled the U.S. recently, and I had just gotten back, I think a couple days before we sat down to chat, and I was absolutely horrified at the conversations I was hearing in just general public. Mm-hmm. That I work in AI, and I think everyone listening knows this, but I had that moment in the Matrix where like Neo sees the code and he starts to understand. And that's what I saw in my last trip, was that, not that I see the code or we're in a simulation or anything nonsensical, but I saw the algorithm manifesting in day-to-day conversations with people, that they were so fringed out from what I would have considered a normal perspective, even a few years ago, that they get all of this information. So they're being informed at a mass scale, but the information is specifically targeted for them. And it's their little bubble of mass information. Whereas prior to social media, there was I think they call it the mainstream media in some circles now, but the stream of information that people had was, I would say, more accessible, deliberate. You could choose to read the paper, or listen to the radio, watch the news on the TV, read a magazine, talk to a person. Whereas now you're not even aware that the information stream is directly targeted and catered to you. And I was seeing this all over, and it's absolutely horrifying to me.
Because it narrows the amount of messages that you take the time or effort to expose yourself to.
Exactly. And it's even hard to get out of it. So I hear like, do your own research a lot, right? So I want to be informed. How do I go be informed? Well, I go to Google probably, right? Well, Google's an algorithm. Right. And Google's already made a bunch of decisions for me about what it thinks I may or may not like. And yes, by the way that you use it, it will change a little bit over time, but it's so hard to get out of it. And it's interesting that you say that, I think you said 18-second specifically clips, but like how you could make a case in a newspaper form. I like to push back on that a little bit, because I think there's now nothing, there now is no such thing as not enough time. People will sit on podcasts for 7 hours and talk about random shit, right? But at the same time, the demand for things is in these like 15-second TikTok forms.
Right.
What do you make of that? It's like we're in this overarching abundance, and apparently people have time to listen to podcasts because they do. But at the same time, our news cycle is seemingly optimized to this almost like, what's the most confrontation we can create? And this is the whole spectrum. I'm not going to even talk politics here. The whole industry is fucked in my mind.
Oh, yeah. Well, so the first thing is the 18-second soundbite is a number that comes from many years ago. It's much less than that now. Yeah. It's like 12 seconds.
Yeah.
It's based on attention span. But when I first started teaching a radio broadcasting course, it was about the news clip, and we would say the target is an 18-second soundbite. That's the attention span.
Sure.
And it might go 24, and it might go 12, but now 18 is too long. But the information is all out there, but people have to want to search it out and find it. And what you were talking about, the algorithm, it goes back to this concept of cognitive dissonance. And I don't expect you to remember that from a class you had with me many years ago.
I say it all the time.
Oh, you do? Oh, that's awesome.
I blame you.
But I explain that to my students today, and they're like, what? And I say, all right, let me just simplify it for you. It's you are more likely to listen to messages that you agree with. You are less likely to listen to messages that you disagree with.
Yep.
And the algorithm has figured that out and said, oh, you like these kinds of conservative messages. We're going to feed you more of those. You like these more liberal messages. Or you like the confrontive guerrilla warfare type TikTok videos, like in the mall where the guy just, in somebody's face or physically harming someone. Yep. And if you watch 5 of those in a row, the algorithm's figured out you like that kind of stuff. It's going to feed you more of that.
Yeah. And I think not only has it figured it out, it's cognitive dissonance is a great term. Observation bias comes into mind in that as the algorithm is feeding you all this information that you want, it's also blinding you away from any other sort of information that might be out there.
Right.
And then it typically feeds you something kind of on the antithesis of that information, like what'll piss you off. Because again, it's like anger, emotion, fight or flight, and that keeps people engaged, because then it's like, oh my God, Tom, did you see this fucking thing that I found and about this other fucking thing? And then you're going to be like, oh my God. And then you're going to be like, Sarah, did you see this fucking thing that Andrew, and then you create, and it sort of self-reinforces the pattern. And it's just a natural human thing. And it used to be people would just, I think, complain around dinner or coffee or whatever, and then it never left. But now your complaint on social media is now a mass communication, right? It's going to potentially millions or billions of people. And that I don't think people really understand the impact that they can potentially have.
Right. But it comes down to how much do you trust the source that's feeding you the information. Yep. So if you're going to Google or if you're going to, some other social media, they're doing some editing, right?
Yep.
There's a machine or perhaps a human being that's deciding what to serve you and what to not serve you. So how much do I trust that machine or that organization? And then secondly, how am I doing it to myself by the clicks that I'm doing? Because every click I'm doing, the machine is recording and trying to figure out more and more about me. And I don't think it's really all that nefarious.
Yeah.
Because they want to send an ad to you along with the content.
Yep.
So they want to sell product. And so if they say, oh, Andrew likes this kind of stuff, they're going to feed you more of that, so Andrew will see more of the ads that they're getting paid to display.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing when you look back at media and you say, well, the media is not journalism like it used to be, because they want to make a profit. First and foremost, in the United States, media is a profit machine. Their number one goal is not to inform you and help you decide when you go to the election booth. That's a nice side benefit, and most media do that. But the number one thing that they're trying to do is sell you products, display advertising to you so that you will buy a product. And then secondarily, we'll also tell you what the weather's going to be tomorrow to help you decide what to wear.
Yeah, so I talk a lot about advertising in the algorithms and AI and all these words that are effectively meaningless now, but that's a really astute observation in that the way that the companies make money is attention, effectively watching the newscast so that I can sell ads for, some fucking pill that didn't probably need to be invented, right? And how the system of ads and then the system of misinformation are almost like identical, right? Because again, it's I want to know that Andrew loves these shirts so that I can serve him more ads for shirts that are similar or whatever. Mm-hmm. I know Andrew is really into turtles, and so I'm going to keep feeding him stories about turtles, and I'm not going to feed him stories about sharks because we know he doesn't like sharks. But every once in a while, we're going to talk about a whale eating a turtle, right?
Right.
And right. How those two systems that I don't think are necessarily inherently bad, but have become this rocket fuel to warp how we think about everything. And
right.
And it's all invisible. Right. And it used to be, again, you would choose your source or you would choose your paper even. And then the system behind that paper, that publication, had people who were making editorial decisions. I guess, do you want to talk a little bit maybe about what constitutes a good source? I know you're not only teaching people how to do this in an academic environment, you've worked professionally in it, but do your own research is the scariest phrase I think I've ever heard uttered. Because most people, if you're actually researching something you don't know about, you probably don't have any understanding of how to actually do it.
Right. Well, and today you would type it into Google.
Right.
And you would say, what does this particular candidate think about this
and read
issue?
Wikipedia?
Yeah, right. Well, it's so funny because I actually would tell my students, never quote Wikipedia, but feel free to use it because Wikipedia is about 95% accurate. Yep. You can get some good information so that you are rooted in a subject before you go to a source and talk to them. But go to an actual source that you trust, that maybe you vetted,
sure,
to make sure that you're getting information. So yes, I a lot of professors would say never say anything about Wikipedia in class, but I would say no, use it as a tool, but not as a source. It's not a primary source to be used in any journalism.
Trust is something it's funny that a trusted source is kind of what I really locked onto there. I worked in the Valley for a little bit, and a lot of talk about trust and getting your customers to trust and all this stuff. And it turns out defining trust is like really hard, and measuring trust is, I think, frankly, impossible. It's if you can't define something, you can't measure it, period. And then measuring something as non-specific as trust is hard. But what is a trusted source? Because every news source or every publication, you can trust us. We're the most trustworthy. You can't trust them because, like, how do you like guide your students or teach your students on how to even understand, can I trust the source I'm working with?
Yeah. Well, that's the continuum theory, right?
Yeah.
That says I'm going to listen to some messages that are way over here on the right, and then and I'm not even just talking politically, but way over here on the right end of the spectrum, and then way over here on the left end of the spectrum. The truth is somewhere in between.
Right.
How do you know? Is it 10 degrees off the left end of the arrow, or is it 47 degrees off the left end of the arrow?
Yeah.
I guess the more sources that you bring in, the better you can sort of hone it in. But you're never, what is truth? You say, what is trust? What is truth? That's amazingly difficult.
Yeah.
And I would say to my students, what is truth? And they would say, well, truth is facts. And I said, but who gave you the fact? Can you trust that source?
Yeah.
Well, Albert Einstein said it. Well, sure, he's really smart, but he's just a human being with a brain similar to yours, and he decided something or studied it enough, and it's probably a fact, but is it truth? And so, there's a lot of loaded words out there. So how can you trust someone? Well, it comes down to trustworthiness. If you listen to a message from a person, 100 messages from them, and 99 of them are right on the money and they feel good to you, and one doesn't, that person has a very high trustworthiness factor. I can go to that message. If you hear 100 messages from someone else and about 33 of them are kind of crazy, well, the trustworthiness factor of that source is diminished. But you're never going to get an exact number. You're never going to get an exact definition of truth or trust because it's just not there. It's somewhere between your heart and your mind.
Right.
You've got to figure it out. And it'll be different for you than it is for me and from anyone listening.
Well, I think it depends on my experience too. I've kind of given up hope on media in general because every time AI is talked about, it's so far, it's not even reality. The stuff I hear reported or talked about, or even like the problems that people are trying to point to, or the advancements, like it's moving so fast. It requires so much knowledge. It requires all this context that frankly, if I were to sit here and talk about it for 3 hours, would be very difficult for me to do and communicate to anybody who's not in it with me. And to your point, other people would have different interpretations of what's going on. But it's one of those things where it's like I'm an expert and I'm like, holy shit, this is really bad. All the stuff that I'm not an expert on, how bad is it?
Yeah.
Is the question that I started. And not that I want to be careful with folks and like, I always joke that fatalism always wins. Because if you understand fatalism, you just basically give up hope on anything. And of course, right, if you set the condition that nothing can be possible or nothing can ever be disproven, then you win, right? There's but I think it's partly human nature to reject that. This idea of truth, I talk a lot about how we're in a post-truth world, in a post-fact world, because everybody gets their own set of information. Again, going back to that analogy of mass media, the paper was read by millions of people and they had the same starting point to make an opinion off or to change an opinion. But now the paper I read and the paper you read are going to be radically different. You're not going to know anything about it. And all of the stories that I'm reading are highly catered to what I think the world view is according to the algorithm. Right. Do you have any suggestions to break out of that? I know that's like a really hard existential question, but
well, it's not realistic, but you could go back to state-controlled media. Yeah. In the 1920s and 1930s, or even maybe just before that, before the 1920s, before radio became somewhat widely adopted as a medium, pretty much, I forget what the real number is, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 92% of American homes subscribed to the Saturday Evening Post.
Right.
So if you had an article in the Saturday Evening Post, 92% of Americans understood the same truth about that as you, or maybe not the truth, but the same content.
Yep.
And then radio came and it started to diversify. And, in the 50s, when I was growing up, there were 3 major networks. Still fairly focused amount of possible messages.
Right.
Now, you just could not get the cat back in the bag because there's millions of sources. And not even just organized commercial media. There's people like you doing a podcast. You're a source, a trusted source, and there's millions of them. And so there's no one media source. And that's why I think some countries have said, we want to control this. We don't want to do like they did in the free market system where it's supported by advertising and it's a capitalistic venture. We're going to have one state-controlled media. But then it's not fair and balanced, and then it's despotic ruler says you're going to put the messages that I want out there regardless of the truth. And so I just don't think you can get it back in the bag.
Right.
And so what we try to do in the media courses is teach people to be discerning listeners or viewers or readers. And who's got time, but we try to tell people not to just have one source. You can't get all your news from TikTok, or you can't get all your news from CNN, or you can't get all your news from Fox News, because you just have to be understanding as a discerning listener or viewer that is leaning me in a direction. And I don't want to be leaned in a direction. So I'll be leaned to the right today, tomorrow I'll be leaned to the left, and I'll find my spot somewhere in the middle.
I don't disagree with any of that. The fear I think I have is that in the world we live in is so chaotic and busy and excuse. I don't want to have to think through that. I don't even think it's like a conscious thing for a lot of people. I think they're just exhausted. They're working hard. They have a family, whatever, excuse.
Right.
And it's never been easier to just consume something and just listen to it. Like I joke a lot about attention metrics because I did do this once upon a time, but it's like if somebody falls asleep watching the YouTube video, you have 100% engagement over 4 hours, let's say. But if they're sleeping and you don't know that, you don't really have engagement. But I don't actually know what I'm trying to say here. You have to, I think, be curious about differences of opinion or the possibility that you might be wrong or the information is biased, and then you seek it out. And I think before, what was it? Was it under Bush where we got rid of the fairness doctrine?
Yeah, 1996.
Yeah, so before 1996, you had to give some sort of an alternate perspective on whatever you're talking about and whatever that means, right? That was also open to interpretation, but it was kind of baked into our system and it was very imperfect and there was all sorts of problems with it. But the lack of that means I could sit here and spew anything I want completely unchecked. And I'm not even a media organization. I guess technically a podcast is media, but like I'm not a news channel. Do you see like something like that kind of being the American way? Because I don't think we're ever going to get state-sponsored media. I know everybody, well, not everybody. A lot of people think PBS is state-sponsored media because they receive money from the government in an indirect way, which is a whole thing.
Right. But no editorial oversight.
Right. The American way was kind of like, okay, we're going to acknowledge that there's more than one side at least. And then that went away in like you said, in 96. Do you see that like kind of coming back or that as maybe a bridge to, I mean, given the current politics, I don't think it comes back, but like.
Yeah, it doesn't come back, but I think it's your responsibility as a intelligent consumer to do that on your own. The government isn't going to force both sides or all sides to a multifaceted argument or concern. They're not going to feed it all to you. And I'm certainly not advocating for a return to a state-controlled media.
Yeah.
Because I like our system just fine, but I just think people need to be more intelligent consumers. As you said, I'm going to on purpose listen to a message that I don't agree with because I want to know what those guys are saying.
Yeah.
And this is much harder for most Americans to do. I might be wrong. You said it.
That's huge.
But for us to entertain that infinitesimally small percentage of chance that I might not be as smart as I thought I was. But that's hard for people to admit.
Yep.
So now, a couple of years ago, are you familiar with News Nation? The media
no, I don't
outlet?
think so.
They're out of Chicago. But, so, and this is going to be overgeneralization. Fox News leans right.
Yep.
Conservative, MSNBC leans left. Oversimplification. But for the sake of argument, I set upon an effort to try to find a truly fair and balanced media outlet.
Yeah.
News Nation came on board, and I think it's out of WGN Chicago. They had their national cable channel, and then they turned it into a news outlet to try to compete with those two. And they said, we're not going to lean left. We're not going to lean right. We're going to go right down the middle.
Interesting.
And then I started watching them, and I think for their first few months, they were decidedly trying really hard to be that ideal of journalism. And they're just not anymore. And depending on the day you listen to or which commentator is in charge of the program, you can hear it leaning.
Yeah.
And so where is it? I don't know. Is there an outlet that is truly fair and balanced that presents all sides of an issue?
Yeah.
I don't know of one.
And I agree. And I think like that's how Fox started out once upon a time too, right? I mean, you can debate, I think, how spectrum-y they were, but they would have and they would have segments and they would kind of do the back and forth that evolved into the hosts, right? This host is left leaning, this host is right leaning, and that's the balance. And then it's, I think, completely chucked all of that away to say we have, we're in the center or right / far spectrum. And I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago, that would have been a controversial thing to say. I really don't think now anybody watching Fox News thinks they're getting like liberal, progressive media. Maybe.
But they're still playing a little bit of lip service to that on both sides.
Yeah.
CNN will have 5 people on the screen at the same time. 4 of them seem to lean very, very left, but they will have the one guy on there who's going to give you the Republican perspective. And that's okay. That's lip service, right? And the same thing, I've seen something during this last election cycle where they had a liberal-leaning person on Fox News on one of their panels, and 3 people just ganged up on that poor woman and beat her senseless verbally. But at least they made an effort to present the other side.
And that's
I don't know if that was disingenuous on their part or not. I guess I'm not saying they were trying really hard to present the other side just so they could beat it down, but it kind of ended up like that.
When I think that too, even I would say Fox News and CNN aren't news in my mind, right? It's a lot of editorial, opinionated content masquerading as news. And I think it was interesting because I was listening when you were talking about News Nation. I asked myself the question of how do I determine what is news? Like what's a credible news source? And, there's people in journalism schools that try to spectrum stuff and try to figure out who's, factual or fair or whatever you want to call it. But what I came back to is I'm a huge reader of the Financial Times, FT, and it's not a plug, but I find that their reporting, they have editorial content, but their news, quote unquote, current event, what's happening in the moment, is the most factual based reporting that I've found. And the reason I say that and how I kind of know that is they put the sources in the piece. So-and-so said this. This financial report says this. This economic forecast says this.
Right.
And you can interpret that. You can, of course, have selection bias of the reports or the people you're reporting on. But they're telling you who's giving that information, and they're also telling you where it's coming from. It's not, whereas like a Fox or a CNN article, it's like 70% of America agrees blank or says this. And it's like, but how do you know that?
Right.
Where did it come from? And not that it's, and maybe that's a very well-sourced statistic based on really good data, but it feels icky to me that they don't even make it clear. And the other thing I think that the FT does a really good job on is they'll link directly to the source data. So if it's a financial report, an economics outlook or whatever, they'll quote it and then they'll usually put a link to the people who put it out or the lab or wherever it came from. Whereas I've noticed the trend in, I don't know, I guess mainstream media or boomer media, as I call it, because nobody watches TV anymore. But they make it really hard. I think a really good example of this is the border stuff. And not to make it political, but the Department of Homeland Security gathers statistics on people who are apprehended at the borders. All of them, right? That's fact.
Right. Yep.
And there is a debate about even if this is a problem.
Yeah.
And the thing that I always hear is, well, it's just, Mexican and Guatemalans and Central Americans trying to come over the border and get a better life in America. And they're far more, that's that one side of the narrative. The actual data is not that at all, right? The number one nationality that was apprehended at the border last year was Chinese citizens.
Yeah.
Or people from...
I didn't know that. I just saw that information about a week ago.
That's the data.
I'm like, really?
And I remember I was hearing, and I try to watch some of the spectrum. It's hard, to be honest. But I was like, what's the data? So I was trained by some good folks, and I go to the source, and I looked at the data, and I was like, holy shit. And I still have this conversation. I had it a couple of days ago where I was like, that what you're saying isn't true. This is the actual data. Well, it's your facts. I'm like, no, this is the Department of Homeland Security under Biden, and this person was a definitely left of center person. That's your guy in your government. And if you don't believe that and the data that they're putting out, I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
And it's become so politicized and so... I feel like all the information stream presented in a mass form at this point is like, it's this side or this side. And you're picking it right out of the gate. And if somebody presents you with something that doesn't agree with your side, it's automatically the other side. And I think that's the real dangerous advance that, as I've noticed in the last few months to a year, is America's always had two political parties. That's not true at all, but like everyone thinks of it that way.
Right.
But even in this, the information in social media is even worse. So that's a really long way, I think, of just kind of talking through like the way that I kind of judge source material or news sources or information sources is, are you telling me where it's coming from? And then you kind of have to do some legwork. And is this some, crazy person on Twitter who did a quote unquote study and made some shit up and put it out? Or is there an institution or an individual who has a long track record of consistency? Because like I can be putting out information and it can all just be wrong, but I'm very consistently wrong. Right? Like that's a thing that can happen.
Well, and then you think that the consumer of that media, maybe, and I'm being generous here, maybe 10% would actually click the link to the source and follow it up. But that, at least putting the source out there, says, I'm making an effort to be transparent.
Yep.
And now it's on the consumer of that media to say, I'm going to check further. You're a great consumer of media. You're going to click the link and look deeper. And I will.
Yep.
I like to do that. I like to click on those links. Even at the bottom of the Wikipedia page, they say where the source is. I click on those links and see where it goes. Sometimes they go nowhere. The broken links, but sometimes they actually go to the source, and then I'll read a whole nother article which has the information I was looking for and lots more cool information.
Exactly.
And so I can get caught in that vortex and keep searching.
But
I think that number is less than 10% that people would actually, at least you said the source, you were transparent about the source, but they're probably not going to take the time and effort to click and double check.
Well, and especially to, when you learn how to write a news article, you put all the juicy stuff up top, right? And then in the age of the internet and clicking, it's how many people can we get to the article to serve an ad to? Can we keep them on there a little bit longer to maybe get another ad in? And that I think has also changed because it to some extent, I think a really good way to illustrate this is just watch a movie from the 50s. And watch a movie now, right? In the 50s, I don't know if this was your class or not, but I took a film class at one point in life and we watched a clip of a guy, I don't remember what the film was, but it was just a normal film from the 50s that anybody would have saw in a movie theater, nothing, out of the ordinary. And the clip from the film was the guy was getting home from, I think, the office and was going to go home in for dinner. You get a shot of the car driving down the street. You get a shot of the car parking. The guy's in there. I think he's like, messing with his briefcase and he's got his paper and he puts it on there. You get a shot of him getting out of the car. You get a shot of him really close up on the door handle. And now the audience is probably flipping out because they're like, what the hell? Get to the end of the point. This is the point. He pushes the door closed. And then you get a wide pan shot of him walking up the driveway. And this is like 3 minutes in, right? He's still not even home yet. He's walking up the driveway. I think his wife was in the window. She waves, she goes to the door, opens the door. You get a shot of her opening the door. You get a shot of him kind of on the foyer. He's standing there. He opens the screen door. And people are still probably like, what the hell? I got to get the end of this story. And, and then I think they hug or kiss or something. And then she's like, how was your day? He's like, oh, and then they start talking. And then there's a shot of in the living room. And then they're walking into the kitchen. And then there's dinner, on the table. And then they're chatting a little bit. And then there's a shot of her sitting down and him sitting down. Now it would be like a dialogue line of, I had dinner. I got home and had dinner.
Yeah.
But the storytelling, for whatever reason, was that. And it was, I have a hard time actually watching older movies because of this too, because my brain is just like, what the fuck, get to the point. Sometimes I like it because it is the actually art of telling the story or it's relevant to the character development or something. But kind of going back to information source, the old news stories used to have all of this detail that I guess we'd probably say now is probably not relevant, but maybe wasn't. And it was more of a story. It was a narrative. It was a way to present the information. Now it's like shocking statistic in the headline, click to read more, even more shocking information, so it's like we get right to that like emotional response and there's no buildup is maybe a kind of a way to say it too. And then it's just so polarized.
Right.
And then people get addicted to that. I don't want to watch the stupid car scene because it's boring. Right. My brain wants the dopamine. What's he going to have for dinner? That's all I want to know. What's he going to eat? And it's like a sandwich or something. Right? It wasn't even like, it's not this like glorious dinner. It was just, just eating a normal dinner.
Well, that's the attention span. The attention span has shrunk so much. We used to have the greater attention span when the number of potential voices to listen to was smaller.
Yeah.
You could read the entire, in your town, there was one newspaper. Yeah. In Minneapolis, we actually had two in Minneapolis. We had the morning paper, the Minneapolis Tribune, and the evening paper, the Minneapolis Star. You're going to get one or the other, and you're going to read almost every page of it.
Right.
Because you want to know what's going on. But now there's so many other voices, and our attention span is limited. So, but the bigger question is, where is the full story recorded somewhere in case I want to hear the whole story?
100%.
Now listen to any of these political speeches for the time frame that we're doing this is right after a major election. So there were for months now rallies or political speeches that went on for sometimes 2 hours, but even 50 minutes.
Yep.
And on the news, most of the media that we consume, we saw the 30-second soundbite that was really irritating or the 20-second soundbite that was quite inspirational.
Yep.
Where's the rest of what that candidate said?
Yep.
Is it saved somewhere? I don't know. I don't know where to find it. What if I want to find what that candidate said last night when they spoke for 80 minutes? I would like to hear the entire 80 minutes. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's there. I can't find it. All I can find is the 30 or 40-second clips or even less. With the most bombastic thing that was said last night, I got that over and over from 25 different media outlets.
Yep.
But I want to hear the whole rest of it because some of it might not have been as bombastic, but probably more important to my life and my 401k and my price at the gas pump or whatever.
Yeah, and the media has gone from being that information disseminator to like conclusion machine.
Right.
And I've noticed that, and like the most recently I think it was a Trump rally, and he made a comment about Liz Cheney, and the context is a little muddy, but what he intended to communicate was that people who send people to war should have an understanding of what that's like and be subject to the same pressures effectively. And I'm giving a lot of editorial on that because it was very uneloquent.
Yeah.
But he said something about like, and then there's Liz Cheney and, let's get 9 guns and point them at her head. And then almost all of the media outlets that I was trying to get candidate news from, which I'm an idiot, I shouldn't have even tried, were like, he said we should kill Liz Cheney. And it's like, that is not at all what he said. He didn't even infer it. And I was actually really mad with a lot of people in my life were telling me that he said we should kill. I'm like, no, he didn't. He had a very poorly articulated point. I'm pretty sure this is what he was intending to communicate, but here's what he actually said. Right. And here's what other people are saying about, oh no, that's what he said. Like, no, he didn't. I actually found the source clip and started sending it to people. Like, I don't agree with the way he said it and a lot of basically everything he says, just to be fully transparent. But at the same time, I'm not going to, I'm calling balls and strikes here as much as I can, even though it's really fucking hard. There was a few people that were making the point, which I think is very good, especially because he's probably the next president, of he says enough horrible shit, you don't have to make stuff up. And a lot of the quote unquote liberal media or the left media, they editorialize and opinionize a lot of what's even said. And I've noticed this, and Fox News does it too. I'm not, trying to excuse anyone here, but I've just noticed that like they don't even show that clip of him saying it, or they'll cut it up. And that used to be the shit you would see on social media or disinformation, right? It was like, I'm going to present you that context through editorial process to try to persuade you or to try to give you the impression of something else that didn't actually happen.
Right.
And now it's just what news is. It was just really shocking to me to see how that has really shifted even in the last few months.
And it's funny, in that particular statement that he made, whatever it was, 13 seconds long, you didn't even have to go much wider to provide the fair contect. It was like another 4 seconds.
Yeah, and then he went on to something totally different, right? Because that's kind of what he does. But
we would teach journalism students that is not right. When you are editing, we get it. You're electronic media. You can't present the entire speech. You got to present a couple of clips. But your clips should be honorable
Right.
to the context and to the intent of what the person was saying.
Yep.
If we cut it up such that, you were saying, the positive end of the battery is the best end of the battery.
Yep.
And I cut it up to make it sound like you're saying the negative end of the battery is the best end of the battery.
Right.
I am not a good journalist. I am not being fair to the intent of the source.
Yep.
So you're not allowed to do that. And if you did that in my class, you'd get an F, right?
Yep.
And if you did that in journalism, you should be fired.
Yep.
But now it's like, good for you, you did that. And we might have swayed a couple of people to
Yep.
believe that other end of the battery is the good one.
And I think probably more conclusively, we had 10 more viewers on that segment, or we had 50 more clicks.
That's
on
right.
That, right.
Right.
I remember,
because we can sell those eyes and ears to our advertisers.
yeah, I remember listening to a former journalist who was either from MSNBC or CNN, and they were talking about they get viewer information sometimes by the second. And so it used to be you would get like the show statistics, right? For people who don't know that, so many people turned in on Thursday night to watch whoever. And then they started looking at segments. So you break up the hour of whatever you're talking about into 5 or 6 maybe topics, and you talk through that. They would get, but now it's like, and sometimes they'll even get them in real time as they're having the conversation about with the panel or whatever. If people are turning away, they cut to commercial and come back with something else. Like, this shit really happens. This isn't conspiratorial. Yeah. And it's again, kind of self-reinforcing machine, right? Like, they have to make money, and the way that they make money is to keep people engaged. How did you see this like change with students over time? Because you've been doing this long enough where probably pre-internet, right? Did you start teaching before the internet was like, I mean, it was around, but nobody probably had it, right?
Yeah, it was the ARPANET, and it was only military and university researchers used it.
Yeah, and now everybody has it in their pocket, right?
Yep.
How stuff changed over time with like attention or like quality, or I think there's really interesting stuff to talk through on that. Because like I know when I was in school, I didn't have much of an attention, but it was probably infinitely more than it is today.
Right. Well, so I've seen a great difference. First of all, I taught at Winona State University, which is a public 4-year higher education institution. Primary goal, workforce preparation. I mean, certainly there were students there that were looking to go out to grad school and to spend a life in academics, but majority were looking for workforce prep. And a majority of them, were traditional college-age students, 18 to 22. Mm-hmm. Well, the attention span of an 18 to 22-year-old in the 1980s was longer than it is now, but they were still 18 to 22-year-olds. But I have seen tremendous change in what I'll call the entitlement scenario of young people. Mm-hmm. When I first started teaching, the students were there with a goal in mind to finish these 4 years and get the piece of paper, the diploma, and then maybe get a good job and a good paycheck. And they would sit through your class and pay attention and show up to most classes and, skip a few here or there, do most of the assignments, and get reasonably good grades. And as time went on, it became, for young people, it's a means to an end, an efficiency machine. And a really smart economics professor, Don Salyard, said this to me one time. He says, higher education is the one thing that people purchase today hoping to get less than what they paid for.
Interesting.
So they buy the entire semester of course, but they want to get the least amount of information and testing and knowledge from you. They just want to get the grade.
Right.
They just want to get the piece of paper because I'm trying to get to the end, which is the piece of paper which will get me a job. But if you get that job and you don't have the knowledge, you can't do the job, you're going to get fired.
Right.
So it became very frustrating as I got closer to the end of my career. And I still loved teaching, and I still loved helping students. And I got to qualify it. I said 10% of the students were very motivated and really wanted to learn, but there's that bell curve. A great number in the middle were sort of lackadaisical, and then there were 10% that if you told them on the first day of class, I'll just give you the B if you'll just go away and quit bothering me, they would go away.
That's crazy.
They would pay full price for the class for all of the credits, and they would go away. And to me, that was frustrating. They didn't care about the content. They were just buying the piece of paper. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, go to one of those paper mill schools and buy the piece of paper and save yourself a whole lot of time and effort and housing expense and buying books. But if you're going to come to this class and be serious about obtaining information and knowledge that you can then use in your future, well, then show up. But there's just a lot less students that don't pay attention, that aren't here for what I consider altruistic reason to get smarter. So that has really changed. And that entitlement of, you owe this to me. You have to help me get the good grade. I gave you the grade you deserve. Well, I want the higher grade. Well, you can't have it. I gave you the grade you deserve. What can I do to get the higher grade? No. The semester's over. You already got it. The message is done. What can I do for you today that will help you give me the higher grade? I mean, I would go through arguments. My first couple of years, students would never argue with you. Yeah. They're like, you're the professor. There was a level of respect. That respect is eroded.
That's really interesting. The economic perspective of, I want to pay a bunch of money but basically get no value because I think the value is the end result. It's like, enjoy the journey, not the destination.
Yeah,
right. And like anyone who's been to, everybody I think has been through school, whether or not you've been to college, but the part of the development that you get in a liberal arts education, scientific education, whatever, is that the process of doing evolves your process of doing, right? It sounds probably maybe too easy, but that's learning, right? It's iteration. Again, I talk a lot about creativity and getting stuck, but I feel like it's come even in school now where it's like, I'm stuck. It's a hard assignment. It's a hard professor, whatever the excuses, and there are always excuses. I'm just done. I want the end.
Right.
And a lot of our society has shifted to doing that, which is part of the problem. Everybody gets a blue ribbon has been the trope of, I think, my generation. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, well, why don't I get a blue and a gold ribbon? And I'm not even going to be on the team. I just want it because everyone else has it. Right. But if you change yourself, and again, and I think another really great example of this is fitness. If you want a bunch of muscles or smaller stomach or whatever, and you go to the gym and you work hard, and without some kind of metabolic problem, you'll develop that if you put in the time, the energy, and the work. However, if you just get a gym membership and never go, you're not going to see the results, right? But and I say that specifically because I don't really do social media anymore. I have Instagram for the podcast, and I frankly haven't even started trying to use it yet because I find that whole thing abhorrent. But I still get the feed, right? And the algorithm still has no idea what to do with me. And so I'm getting all sorts of crazy shit. But I was on the other day trying to figure out if I wanted to like do a post. I'm too big of a boomer to know how to do a post. But I just like, well, let's see what the feed is today. Cause I check in on it because it gives me a little bit of a barometer of what, the zeitgeist of Instagram is, at least. And I noticed that it's all fitness people, tends to skew pretty high women, but it's all like unrealistically fit people.
Yes.
And people who can't see me at home, I'm slightly probably above average fitness. I don't know. I bike 20 something miles a day, and I'm very active. I eat well. I lift some heavy stuff once in a while, but I'm not like a gym bro, if folks kind of know what that means. But but all these people, but so that's what it's telling you, right? You're and this is the same 90s problem of telling teenage girls that they're too fat or too thin and creating eating disorders and this whole thing. So that's what people are getting bombarded with. Yet the reality that you see in your class is that I'm not going to put in the work. I just want the paper. So I'm trying to, there's a dissonance here, right? Yep. Of I'm constantly getting bombarded with all these successful people on Instagram. This person's rich and they're in this beach or whatever. It's like always the most, frankly, unrealistic successes in anyone's life, or most of it's manufactured now. But like all you're seeing is the achievement effectively.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And presumably you want that, but yet there's no work. So I'm wondering, is the social media leading to that in real life where people are just like, well, yeah, I'm smart. I want to be smart. People who go to school are smart. So therefore I just want the credential and then I feel smart. Or is there something else different and it just seems like it's related? I don't know if that was a little bit of a ramble statement.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, as I said, it's an efficiency machine, and I think their parents taught them that you want to get the best that you can for the least amount of effort.
Which isn't a bad principle on its, but at the same time, it's like out of balance.
But you're not buying an apple.
Right.
If you're going to the grocery store and you're buying an apple, you're going to pick through until you find the one that doesn't have any spots on it, and you're going to buy that apple. And you're going to feel like you got a really good deal because you got the best apple, and you're going to enjoy it. But you're not buying an apple, you're buying a longitudinal effort.
Yeah.
I mean, a longitudinal product that cannot resolve itself in 1 year or 3 months or 1 day.
Yeah.
And it requires repetition. So you probably remember I taught a class in photography, and I can't remember if you were in that, but I had like 13 assignments.
Yeah.
And I did the same assignment twice in the semester. I did it once, and then about 4 weeks later, I did the exact same assignment. And the student said, we already did this one. And I said, I know, but now you've absorbed 4 weeks of additional information and knowledge and practice. You can probably do it better now than you could do before.
Yep.
There's some repetition required to become proficient at anything.
It's the one and done versus, and again, I think this is part of why creativity falls to the wayside, because you can get lucky or you can be clever and you get recognized for it. And then I did it once and I'm an expert at whatever, right? I snowboarded and I didn't fall down and I went off a jump for the first time ever, got a great picture. Now I'm an excellent snowboarder. That's easy. I don't see why everybody, says it's so hard. And the reality is that you might have just gotten lucky. Maybe you are just a naturally good snowboarder and you could also improve and develop on that skill.
Right.
And it's so interesting to me that there isn't a reinforcement for that, or that people have seemingly just given up on that idea of advancement or progress. It's just so perplexing to me, I guess, is I just don't love doing hard stuff. I'm building a company and I fought for 9 hours recently on a problem that shouldn't have been a problem, and something updated somewhere. I'm sure everybody at home has had this problem where it just doesn't work the way you think it should, and unfortunately, when you're building software, you got to figure it out.
Right.
When it was done, I wasn't happy. Frankly, I was pissed because I was like, this shouldn't have been a problem, but it was done. Right. And I did learn some stuff about how to, next time there's a problem, can I make this 9 hours, 6 hours, or can I decrease the duration? But I would have never gotten that had I not done it. And what I think I'm afraid of is that I think we used to call that grit, a perseverance, and that the kids, and I'll rag on the kids, that they just don't, that doesn't seem to be in the zeitgeist at all.
Right.
Right. It's hard, I'm done. Or it's easy, I did it.
What you said was so important. I learned some things, so how when I encounter this similar situation in the future, I'll do it better.
Yeah.
That's really important. So I would say to my students, the process is part of the product. The process of doing a project and then another one and another one and another one and getting better, you're buying the whole thing. You're not just buying the letter grade at the end of the semester. You're buying the entire 15-week experience. Now live in it and enjoy it. And so I would give an analogy. I would say you're going to go buy a new car, a brand new car, a Corvette. Well, okay, so we're Winona State University, a really high-quality public institution. You're buying a Camaro maybe, or a Mustang. Maybe not a Corvette, But you're buying a car, and then what you really are going to do is park it in the garage and never drive it.
Right.
You just want to have the experience of saying, I'm a Camaro owner.
Yeah.
No, you want to drive that thing and get value out of it. So you're buying an education. You just don't want to park it in the garage and say, I have that degree. You want to drive it around for 15 weeks and gather some information.
Yeah.
And so when you give that analogy, and I'm not throwing all students under the bus, because there's some really good students that get it and they want to become proficient and good at what they do. And I see that more in, not to single out majors, but in the healthcare healthcare field and the health sciences, they really do want to get good.
Yep.
And they want to be smart and knowledgeable. And, if they get a career in healthcare, they don't want to hurt people.
Exactly.
And so it feels like those kinds of students are more engaged in the process. And in some of the other fields, certainly there are students who really do engage and some that don't. But the percentage is higher in some of the other fields where I want to get to the end faster.
When it feels like the percentage just, and I've seen studies, right, and the data does kind of back this, that just in general, people are have less attention, have less focus. All you hear is, I have ADD. That's like the new thing now. And it's like, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But like having lack of attention doesn't mean you have ADD. And attention is a skill. Being able to focus on something. Again, I didn't want to spend 9 hours solving this fucking problem, but it needed 9 hours of my attention apparently to get done. And I didn't know that until it was done.
Right.
I wonder too, how much of this is also kind of like around the idea of identity. Like identity politics is always something that people put out, but it seems like as you go younger on the spectrum of people, identity is more and more important. I think like for your generation, again, this is all broad generational shit that's all kind of made up, but having a family and a house and a job was like very important. That was your identity. I am a professor. I am a baker. I am whatever.
Right.
But now it's become all of these attributes. And what I've observed personally is that the attributes of your identity that seem to matter the most to people are the most superfluous things that don't require work or are really easy to change. Like I'm a avid swimmer because I have a picture of me on a beach, right? But you're not like you're in the Olympics, right? There are ways to like quantifiably identify how good at swimming you are. But it's also really easy to say that. And who's going to go disprove it and be like, you're not an avid swimmer,
Yeah.
And I feel like we've made it more complicated again with social media, because not only are you a swimmer, which is like the boomer way to think about it, you are, 7 or 8 other adjectives of swimmer. And oftentimes, again, identity politics, it's race, sex, gender, ethnic background, all this kind of stuff. But it could also be like ocean, river. And I feel like part of that is because of technology allows us to get more information and makes everything more accessible and then starts to segment people. I want to be clear. I'm not saying anyone's dumb, but people have, especially the kids, have an amazing ability to synthesize information because the world we live in is just so fucking information dense. Yeah. But at the same time, there's no attention to go, this is probably the best time in the world to get as much information on anything that you've ever wanted.
Right.
And there's this huge dissonance of like, I can synthesize all this crazy stuff about shit that I can't run TikTok, but the kids can, and they thrive on it and they're finding all this shit. Whereas they also can't sit down and read a chapter in a book without checking their phone 50 times.
Right. Right.
Have you seen those patterns at all? Or like, I know.
Oh yeah, definitely seen that. Although, I have to check that and back up a couple steps. I think it was getting really bad about 5 or 6 years ago, where the attention span and the, they get the little shot of dopamine from checking their Facebook and seeing how many likes they got on something, or checking their Twitter and seeing how many people are following them. I feel like that's come back a little bit.
Interesting.
In my classes, I have noticed, and maybe it's just the difference of going from a public school to a private school, now that I'm teaching one class a semester at a private school,
right.
I have found my students to be more engaged. They can pay attention. They can set the phone down and not check it. Now, surely there are some in class in the back row checking a message during class.
Yeah.
And when cell phones started to become much more ubiquitous, I used to sort of be the cell phone police in my class, and I'd get mad at students and I'd kind of burn them in front of the whole class. Put your phone down. But that was too much negative energy, and it just kept happening more and more, and I didn't want that much negativity. I just stopped doing it.
Right.
And I felt like it increased, but now it's dropping down. It's become so much a part of their lives that they can't go anywhere without it. Right. But when something important is happening, they can set it down. And so at least I feel like that's changing and coming back a little bit. I'm not sure other educators are experiencing that.
I think the data suggests that, especially after COVID. I think a lot of people, and I don't know where the age distribution jumps, but it's probably millennial, Gen Z, somewhere in there, or maybe Gen Z, Gen Alpha, where they were so overloaded with technology. They were the kids who were were born and the iPad existed and they were on it from age 2 on up, that they were like, this, we can't do this anymore. It's too much. Whereas a lot of people went the other way of like, oh, now this is my little tiny window into the world and going to give me all the information I want. But at the same time, I do feel like that ability to focus has probably getting better. And again, I think the data suggests that it is. I still don't see the grit, the perseverance, because this is also the generation where they want the whole world, they want the process of being engaged to directly relate to them or what they want or what their perception of engagement is. I think this is, again, because of the algorithm. But so I guess you see that then too, like if the attention is getting maybe better, let's just say it is for the sake of kind of a conversation.
Yeah.
Is it the mass media problem of Dr. Tom knows how to present the class information in this way, but student Andrew is like, oh my God, this isn't, he's too angry or whatever, insert my opinion.
Yeah. Right.
And by the way, my opinion is the only thing that matters, and you need to listen to it, and not only listen to it, but then change how you do your stuff because I want it this way. Is that something that's really happening? I hear a lot about it, but I don't know.
Well, there was, but like I said, I think that's that entitlement theory where you've got to teach it in my way and give me what I need because I'm the one paying for it.
Yeah.
There was that, and that felt like that was really growing up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I think COVID might have had something to do with it. Everybody blames everything on COVID.
Yeah.
But the whole world changed on COVID, and it's like we're not meeting face to face anymore, but I still got to try to get value from this class. I still got to try to challenge my students, even though now I have to do it with a camera and a microphone and an internet cord. Mm-hmm. And it changed so much, but I think it required more effort on the parts of the students.
Yeah.
And therefore, they got used to giving a little more effort. Maybe that's why it changed.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying it as a professor because I do feel like the students are more attentive now than they were 4 years ago.
Well, that's good. So there is hope.
Yeah, there is hope.
Yeah, fatalism.
Yeah, but it's going to, so then if you are a fatalist, it's going to go back, right?
Yeah.
So now we need another COVID about every 5 years ago or every 5 years. I don't want that. But,
no, I know. I hope not.
Does there need to be another emergency or another terrible thing? You know, I mean, the world changed after 9/11 and we all became much more civil to each other.
That's true.
We became much more patriotic, to use a loaded word, but people in the United States became sort of a brotherhood of us against these terrorists that tried to harm us.
Right.
And so it was a terrible tragedy. Never want to have another one like that. But there was some good that came from it. COVID, terrible pandemic. And yet there was some good that came from it. And so do we have to have this terrible catastrophe to change the world for a better? No, maybe we could change the world for the better knowing that these kinds of things happen.
Yeah.
Let's just manufacture a moment that says, let's all be better to each other. I don't think that'll work, though.
Yeah.
We react.
Yeah, I think that's it. And it's interesting, as you're kind of explaining that, I was thinking back to something you said earlier. It's almost like COVID was such an accelerant and a mind shift, but it was basically an adversity, right? Like political opinions, I don't really give a shit, but it sucked for at least 3 or 4 months everywhere because we didn't know if we were all going to die.
Right.
And then it got politicized and the rest is history. But those, 2 or 3, maybe 4 months, everybody was in it together. It was indiscriminate, the invisible virus. It kind of united us. But then the observation that I had was that, especially as I've traveled through the country and even still today, there were a lot of people who wanted to get back to normal quicker.
Right.
There were a lot of people who wanted to just accept this as the new normal. And there was a lot of people who I think were just trying to deal, right? It's like, now my kids are home and I got to work from home and, I live in a 1-bedroom house and it sucks or whatever.
Yeah.
And I find that that's kind of a moment of adversity. And going back to what you were saying about, I just want the prize kind of thing, or I just want the degree and I don't want to put in the work. We had to put in the work. And then I think you made a conscious decision of, I want to get back to my life before COVID. I now need to adapt based on the new data or the new science or whatever you want to say. And so it really forced us to change in that. Going back to the analogy, you had to do the work, you had to do the assignment, right? Because you wanted to get back to something else, or you wanted to change. So it's like the motivating factors were, I want to return to what I think is normal, or I want to create the new world that I'm in. But I think everybody agreed we can't keep doing exactly what we're doing forever. Like something needs to change.
Right.
And it's interesting that I think that might be the way to, if you can figure out a way to make people change or decide. If you can confront somebody with a challenge of a change, you have to make a decision. I'm going to stay the way I am. I'm going to do something different. It's usually a binary choice, right? And how that settles, is anybody's guess. And depending on how complex or whatever it is, it's different, but you still you're forced to make a choice. And I feel like a lot of this, again, I'm served up the information. I don't have to look at the source. I'm not even confronted with having to look at the source. It's just there. And so now I'm really starting to think about, is there a way to start to do that? And not that anybody wants to be bombarded with choices all day long, because like the world's complicated enough, but raising awareness and something like Anya and I were kind of talking about, which I'll probably grab her after this and chat to her about it, because I think it's an interesting idea. Do you see that like outside of academia? Because academia is this weird environment where, you're forced to learn stuff, but you're also forced to produce new stuff, right? Like that's the whole point. If you're just regurgitating all the shit that everyone else has done, even if that's a new interpretation or a new spin, or if you're studying, you're trying to push the field forward. Do you see that, like any ways to adapt that to like the quote unquote real world? I know academia is real, but you've worked professionally and in academia too. And like, it's a kind of a weird skill set and a special skill set that a lot of people don't see.
Yeah. Well, one of the keys of academia is research. They say, what is it? Service, research, and education, I guess.
You passed.
I mean, yeah. Well, I've been retired for 2 years, so I don't even remember what our motto is anymore. But service and research, well, research is to move knowledge forward. Mm. But the service part, to educate people for career preparation, it's sort of a carrot and stick kind of thing, right? Is what's the reward at the end? Or as I said before, I'm trying to buy the product for the least amount of money and the greatest efficiency. But I think if we could institute more of that. So with COVID, the carrot and the stick was, would you like to live a little longer? That was the carrot, right? If I behave in certain ways, I might be able to extend my life.
Right.
If I buy a really nice house, I might have a better quality of life for the next 20 years. If we can do a better job of communicating what the carrot is, what the reward is, we might then get the behavior that would lead toward that reward better. Really qualify what the reward is.
Yeah.
So here is the behavior we would like to get from our audience. How are we going to make them believe that is a worthy goal to move toward? And here's the ways in which you move toward it. And then explain to them how it serves them. It will serve you to not rush this process. It will serve you better to take your time and get it right. So if you're going into the healthcare field, you don't hurt people later.
Right.
But you got to do a better job. Well, you got to get their attention and explain at least that much to them, and then the rest of it's on them.
Part of this is also based on the incentive, right? It's like, especially in the business world, the incentive structure is all that really matters. And our society, for better or worse, has decided you basically need a 4-year degree for most professional occupations. Yes, there are still occupations you don't need, or you can get a specialty education. Right. And frankly, I think those are sometimes better for most people. But I wonder how much of the incentive structure of like, I just want to get a job, I'm really interested in blank, or I want to make money, and here's 4 or 5 years that is put in front of me, how much of that is a misunderstanding of even what you're buying? So it's like going back to the car analogy, if I'm trying to get a car that I'm going to use occasionally and I get sold a sports car, that's really bad product for me because, I'm not taking a lot of trips. I'm probably just driving around town. I don't need to probably go fast. Whereas like a Prius or an electric car might be better versus if I'm, needing to go do work with my car, maybe I need a truck because I need the ability to put stuff in it or have the flexibility. And if you sell me a Prius, that's a bad product.
Right.
And I don't think there's blame anywhere. I think the idea is that we want a educated population that's capable of doing whatever it is we need to do, but at the same time, on-the-job training doesn't really exist anymore. And even internships are like, well, you got to be in college. You have to have a degree to get an internship now.
Yeah.
I think you probably agree with that problem in general, but what's the responsibility of like the institutions to try to set that straight or advertise a better product maybe, or set those expectations? Because like in a business world, if I'm going into a meeting, my job is to set the expectation.
Yeah, right.
Right. Because I'm the leader of the team, or I'm trying to sell a product to the company, or we're trying to make a deal, and we got to be clear. But I feel like academia doesn't do a good job of that. I'm not trying to shit on academia, but
no, I think you're right. Okay, first of all, I literally just said that in a lecture this morning to my students. If you're the leader at a meeting, plan the meeting.
Yep.
And set it up. Have a goal in mind for this meeting, set a time frame, have an agenda, and do that. How many meetings do we go to where, the first 10 minutes is, what lovely weather we're having?
Yep.
No, let's get on to the assignment.
Or people coming in late. Or
yeah. During COVID, oh, there's a puppy in the room. Let's all look at the puppy. No, we're supposed to be doing this project.
Right.
And then finish your meetings on time. So I said that. But I think you're right, and I come from higher education, 4-year public university, so this is almost sacrilege for me to say this, but not everybody needs a 4-year degree.
Right.
If I'm talking to, let's say, a high school sophomore, 10th grade, what do you want to do with your life? What motivates you? What makes you feel good? What do you think it's unfair to ask this of a 17-year-old. What do you think you want to do for the next 40 years?
Yep.
But you might not need a 4-year education. If they say, I want to earn $100,000 a year, you might not need a 4-year education.
Go be an electrician or a plumber, right?
Yeah,
drive a truck.
Learn how to drive a truck really well.
Yeah.
And that might be awesome for you because you get to travel the country and do your job really well and earn $100,000 and have a very fulfilling life. So there are people several blocks away from me that would like to strike me dead for saying that. But not everybody needs a 4-year degree. But those that choose an advanced career that does require some time on task, study, maybe a 4-year degree is appropriate for you. And I'm trying to expand your brain. In the 4-year world, I'm trying to teach you a set of concepts that some higher education organization said these are the learning outcomes they must have before they leave your class. I'm going to teach those, but I'm also trying to teach you how to think. I'm trying to teach you how to think for yourself, challenge things for yourself, learn on your own so that when you're done with my class, you can still challenge yourself to go further. And maybe someday remember, hey, that Grier was a pretty good guy. Maybe I should call him and invite him to be on my podcast
Be on a
someday.
podcast, yeah. I think if the audience hasn't figured it out yet, I was a student at one point.
And a very good student. I'm not just saying that to pander to you. You challenged me in class to think more because you said, why am I here? What am I doing? There were times when you and I had a discussion in the hall that wasn't the nicest, but I'm like, that kid is right. Why am I wasting his time with this? Let's challenge him to go further and push harder.
Yeah, it's only gotten worse over time.
Oh, yeah? I don't sense
I'm a little bit more respectful than I probably was at the time. But yeah, I don't really disagree with any of that. I guess these are the topics that I wish I was reading about in the paper of like, how do we get more people employed in higher paying jobs with the least amount of effort, right? Again, not everyone needs to go to a 4-year. Not everyone should have to. And a lot of on-the-job training should frankly happen. Like the first job I had out of college, I didn't need a college degree for. I'd spent a shit ton of time learning the industry and the company and the processes and the software. And like, I could have graduated at 18, granted I've been a little probably less mature, but like they had a training program and everything. Right. So it's like, but I'm really glad I went to a university, I have a master's, but I think again, the meta context of higher education is also like, you're going to learn some skills and some information, but being taught how to think is really being taught how to learn. And it's how to process information. It's how to make decisions. It's how to make determination. And those are the skills I think that every job in the country needs and wants.
Right.
And yet we have this like total breakdown of understanding, right? I want the certificate in thinking. And it's like, that's not how it works.
Yeah. Right. Well, just think about this podcast and I'm not sure how long we've been talking, but maybe an hour.
Yeah.
Or close to an hour. some media person might grab this and slice it up and say, Grier says not everybody needs a higher education.
Yeah.
And they're going to pull that one 11-second soundbite from this. It takes a long time to work through all this and try to decide. And you and I are working through it together, and we're both kind of having a tough time with it.
And that's the whole point of this podcast, right? Is to inspire creativity, but then really focus on curiosity. And so if people are more interested in this, like I'm having recurring guests, the next one I think is booked next week, and it's having a series of conversations with people in different fields and different backgrounds. And I'm trying to create that narrative through the episodes, which is also going to get lost in the clipping, but I don't know. I don't really care. And I say,
but here's what's,
I'm usually the one who says the inflammatory stuff, so don't worry about it.
But here's what's hopeful about that is you have the podcast and people are listening to it. So the curiosity is out there. Now, how can we grow that?
Yeah, and I think part of the secret for this specifically is like I'm not trying to monetize it. I'm not making it a career. I'd love to have a career of talking to people for a living, but it's a whole different spectrum. One question I always finish with, and it was taught to me once upon a time by a professor of journalism. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, you just passed News Writing 101. The golden question.
And I honestly ask this question every time. I even do it in business and in interviews. But I got to give you credit for it.
And it's funny when I get interviewed by news media students once in a while, and I always wonder who taught them intro to journalism. And I can tell if they ask the golden question at the end that gives you a chance. So creativity. So I will just give you, I have one little anecdote.
Yeah.
And it comes from a guy named Mike Vance, who wrote a book called Think Out of the Box and a couple other books along those titles. I think he was a corporate motivator, but for a few years in the 80s and 90s, he was the dean of Disney University, which was sort of the school that people who worked at the Disney parks went to try to train them to be more creative, more outgoing, make sure that the guests had a great time. And Mike Vance had a lot of great quotes, but the most important quote that actually changed my life from him was this. And it's short, easy to remember. You cannot learn from experiences you are not having.
Yeah.
So now if you remove the double negative, you can learn from experiences you are having.
Yeah. I love that.
Isn't that, it's just powerful. It says, challenge yourself to learn things you don't already know about. Expand your brain.
Yep.
Instead of driving the most efficient route to work every single day, leave a few minutes early, drive a different road. You might see a really beautiful thing or meet a really cool person if you're walking. That actually changed my life because I heard it from him at a workshop right at a time where I was at a fork in the road in my career. And I had decided on side A, and then I heard him say, you cannot learn from experiences you're not having, and someone offered me an opportunity down fork B, and I said, I'm going to try that. Worst that can happen is I'll invest 8, 10, 12 weeks and then change my mind and go back to A, but I will have learned something.
Right.
And I took fork B and ended up working at Winona State University for 34 years. It was not intended, but it turned out to be exactly what I was supposed to do with my life. If I could leave people with that, and that blends into the idea of creativity and curiosity and being open, you cannot learn from experiences you are not having.
I love that. I feel like it's kind of in line. Michael Jordan always gets the quote associated to him, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yes.
And I don't think he actually said it.
Oh, yeah, right.
But that's the same idea, right? If you're not, trying new stuff, if you're not putting yourself out there, you're not open to new things, then nothing will actually change.
Right.
And something I talk a lot about, especially in startups, when I'm talking through that with folks, is there's a lot of great books on, I founded X company, look how brilliant and great I am. And like, yeah, you're brilliant and great and you succeeded. And a lot of people will read those books and say, well, I could do that. But what you're learning or what you're taking away from that is really, you're just synthesizing someone else's experience, which is great. And it's really great that then you have that to template from. But until you actually do it, until you have to make those decisions in real time without the data, or make the wrong move and then try to correct it, you actually don't do it. And you don't actually, like, you get like 90% of the way there. And you're shortchanging yourself. So
yeah, it's still external to you
Yeah.
until it becomes internal to you.
So I always end with that. And then I usually ask folks, is there anything that you're reading or watching or consuming that you want to share with folks? I know you mentioned the book. I'll put it in the show notes, but it doesn't have to be related to this. It's just trying to spread ideas. Yeah.
Well, so I got a lot of things. Since I'm retired, I'm reading less academic things. I used to spend most of my time reading academic things. I'm actually, reading some murder mystery novels now just for sheer enjoyment, which is great. But I did happen on I thought you might ask a similar question, so I thought about it.
Yeah.
There's a book, and it's a picture book. It's mostly pictures, cool photography, but thoughtful thoughts from a guy named Darden Smith. He's a folk singer-songwriter out of Austin, Texas. Not, super huge, not, like an A-lister, but I personally really enjoy his music. But then he put out a book with his old school Polaroid-style photographs and then just his music.
Yeah.
He just wrote stuff down that he was thinking about. It's called The Habit of Noticing.
Okay.
And it's a really nice book, and it's a short read because it's more pictures than writing. But some of the things that he writes are just it's like, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And if you read that book, you'll have that moment. And I'm not trying to sell his book for him or anything. I don't owe him anything, but I'm really enjoying it. And I've been through the book 3 times, and I just picked it up again last week, and I'm reading it again.
Yeah.
And there's so many moments where I'm like, yes, Darden, that's exactly right. And so, I'm really enjoying that. Right
Awesome.
now.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that as well. Thanks again for the time, and I really appreciated talking with you.
Yeah, it's really been fun talking to you and remembering back to kind of the way that we had these discussions in the hallway of Helps Hall at Winona State University so many years ago, and here we're doing it again. Thanks for inviting me.
And now it's mass media.
It is. You've turned it into mass media.
You can find us at 38.com. It's like the word create, but with a 3 instead of the C. As always, we encourage you to listen, watch, do.
We'll see you next time. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/38 or at ko-fi.com/38.
Thanks for listening.